Hi, my friends. Today I want to present you a new story. Enjoy watching it.
I remember the first few months of our marriage like they were wrapped in a golden haze. Dylan and I had been swept up in the romance of it all. The whirlwind proposal, the picture-perfect wedding, and the honeymoon that felt like a dream. Everything seemed flawless, almost too perfect, as if life had handed me everything I could have ever wanted. Dylan, are you sure your friends will like me? I asked nervously, smoothing down my dress in front of the mirror. It was our first dinner party as a married couple, and the pressure to make a good impression was weighing on me. Of course, Lucy, Dylan replied, stepping behind me and wrapping his arms around my waist. He kissed the top of my head, his familiar warmth easing my nerves. They're going to love you. I know I do. His words brought a smile to my face, and for a moment I let myself relax. Dylan was always calm, confident, and reassuring, traits I had admired about him from the very start. We were a team, and together we could face anything. At least, that's what I thought. The evening began just as I'd hoped. Dylan's friends were warm and welcoming, and I found myself laughing at their jokes and joining in the conversation with ease. It was one of those nights that felt like a movie scene, where everything seemed to be in perfect harmony. The wine flowed, the laughter echoed, and I began to feel like I truly belonged. And then she walked in, Corey, Dylan's ex-girlfriend. I had heard about her in passing, never giving much thought to her presence in Dylan's life. He had assured me they were just friends, nothing more. But as soon as I saw the way she greeted him, her arms lingering around his neck just a little too long, something inside me tensed. "Oh, Dylan," Corey cooed, her voice dripping with familiarity. "You haven't changed a bit." Her eyes flicked over to me, assessing me in a single glance, and I felt instantly out of place. She was tall, impeccably dressed in a sleek designer outfit, her hair perfectly styled as if she had stepped off a runway. And here I was suddenly feeling like the girl next door trying to fit into a world that wasn't my own. "Corey," Dylan greeted her with a quick hug. "Good to see you. This is Lucy, my wife." "Wife?" Corey raised an eyebrow, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. "How wonderful. Nice to meet you," I said, extending my hand, determined to be polite. Her grip was firm, almost too firm, as if she was trying to send a message. "Likewise," she said, her gaze flicking back to Dylan as if I didn't even matter. The rest of the evening was a blur. Corey managed to insert herself into every conversation, laughing a little too loudly at Dylan's jokes and reminiscing about their shared memories in a way that made me feel invisible. It was subtle, but I could feel the shift. The once perfect evening had taken a turn, and I was left wondering if this was the beginning of something I wasn't prepared for. When we got home that night, I couldn't hold back any longer. "Dylan," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "what's the deal with Corey?" He looked at me surprised. "What do you mean?" "I mean, she was all over you tonight. It was like I wasn't even there." Dylan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Lucy, you're overthinking it. Corey's just Corey. She's always been a little extra, but that's just how she is." "Extra?" I repeated, crossing my arms. It felt like she was trying to undermine me. "Look, you have nothing to worry about," he said, stepping closer to me. "You're my wife, Lucy. She's just a friend. That's all." I wanted to believe him, I really did. But as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, the perfect beginning of our marriage no longer felt so perfect. Something had shifted, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Corey wasn't done. It was only a few weeks after that first dinner party when I started noticing the subtle changes in Dylan's behavior. It wasn't anything obvious at first, just little things that felt off. He seemed distracted, his phone constantly buzzing with messages that he brushed off as work stuff. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself that I was being paranoid. After all, we were newlyweds. Everything should have been perfect. But the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. One evening, as we were getting ready for bed, I noticed Dylan scrolling through his phone again, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Who's texting you this late?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Oh, just Corey," he replied, not looking up. "She's asking about some business connections for her new project." I felt a pang of annoyance. "Corey again? You seem to be talking to her a lot lately." Dylan finally looked up, his expression a mix of confusion and impatience. "Lucy, we've been over this. She's got a lot of business ties and she's helping me with some stuff for work. It's nothing personal. I bit my lip, trying to push down the frustration. It just feels like she's around all the time, and I can't help but feel like she's trying to. I don't know, undermine us. Dylan sighed, rubbing his temples. You're reading too much into it. Corey's just a friend, and you're my wife. I don't get why this is bothering you so much. Because she makes me feel like I don't belong in your life, I blurted out, the words spilling out before I could stop them. There was a long pause. Dylan looked at me, his brow furrowed. That's not true, Lucy. You belong with me. But you've got to trust me. Corey is harmless. I wanted to believe him, but something inside me knew better. Corey wasn't harmless, not by a long shot. And Dylan's refusal to see that only made the cracks in our relationship grow wider. A few days later, Corey posted a picture on social media that sent me spiraling. It was a throwback photo of her and Dylan, laughing together at some fancy event, long before I was ever in the picture. The caption read, "Good times with old friends, some things never change." The comments were filled with people gushing about how great they looked together, how perfect they were as a couple back then. My stomach churned as I scrolled through them, each one feeling like a stab to the heart. I confronted Dylan as soon as he walked through the door that evening. "Did you see what Corey posted?" I asked, holding up my phone. "She's practically parading the fact that you two used to be together." Dylan barely glanced at the screen before shrugging. "It's just a picture, Lucy. We've got nothing to hide. She's reminiscing, that's all." "Reminiscing?" I repeated, incredulous. "She's making it look like you two are still close, like I'm the outsider." "Lucy, stop," Dylan said, his voice rising. "You're overreacting. Corey's not trying to make you feel bad. You're reading way too much into this." I stared at him, feeling a mix of hurt and anger. "How can you be so blind? She's doing this on purpose, Dylan. She's trying to come between us." He shook his head, exasperated. "I don't have time for this. You need to stop obsessing over Corey. She doesn't matter." But the cracks were there, growing wider with every argument, every subtle dismissal. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The tension between Dylan and me had only grown worse, especially after Corey's constant appearances in our lives. But the final blow came when Corey organized a dinner at a new, exclusive restaurant downtown. Of course, she'd invited Dylan. I, on the other hand, hadn't received an invitation, though it was clearly a couple's event. "I'm sure it was just an oversight," Dylan said, adjusting his tie in the mirror. "Corey probably thought you'd be busy with work or something." "An oversight?" I asked, my voice barely concealing the hurt. "She's intentionally leaving me out, Dylan. It's not a mistake, and you know it." He sighed, turning to face me. "Look, it's a business dinner. You know how she operates. She's got connections that could really help me. Let's not make this a bigger issue than it is." I bit my tongue, the words I wanted to say trapped behind a wall of frustration. I could feel my anger bubbling under the surface, but this time I wasn't going to let Corey get the upper hand. "Fine," I said, my tone steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Go. But don't expect me to sit around and keep pretending this is normal." Dylan gave me a long look before nodding slowly, as if he didn't quite understand why I was so upset. "I'll be back by midnight." As soon as he left, I grabbed my coat and keys, determination surging through me. I wasn't going to stay home and wait to be humiliated. I knew where the dinner was taking place, the exclusive restaurant owned by an old family friend of mine. What Corey didn't know was that I had recently become a co-owner. When I arrived at the restaurant, I scanned the crowd until I spotted Corey and Dylan sitting at the head of a long, elegantly decorated table. The sight of them laughing together sent a pang through me, but I quickly pushed it aside. Tonight was about more than emotions. It was about reclaiming my place. Taking a deep breath, I walked toward the table. The chatter died down as I approached, eyes widening in surprise as people noticed me. Corey's smile faltered for a split second before she plastered it back on, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "Lucy," she said, her voice dripping with feigned sweetness. "I didn't expect to see you here. I thought you were busy tonight." I smiled, tilting my head slightly. "I wouldn't miss this for the world, Corey." Dylan stood, clearly uncomfortable with the sudden tension. "Lucy, what are you doing here?" Before I could respond, Corey chimed in, her voice a touch too loud. "You know, this table's a little full right now, but I'm sure we could find you a seat somewhere else, maybe at the bar." The snide comment hung in the air, and I could see some of the other guests exchange awkward glances. Corey was trying to embarrass me in front of everyone again, but this time I had the upper hand. I leaned forward slightly, still smiling. "Oh, that won't be necessary. You see, I actually co-own this restaurant." Corey's expression froze. She blinked, clearly caught off guard. The others at the table began to murmur in surprise. "What?" Corey asked, her voice faltering for the first time that evening. "Yes," I continued, my voice steady and calm. "I partnered with the original owner a few months ago, so technically you're all here as my guests." The power shift was palpable. I watched as Corey's face reddened, her confidence visibly crumbling. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but no words came out. Dylan looked at me in disbelief, clearly unsure how to respond. "Now," I said, turning to the group with a gracious smile, "I hope you're all enjoying the evening. If there's anything you need, don't hesitate to let me know." I turned and walked away from the table, leaving Corey and the others speechless. The moment was mine, finally, and for the first time in weeks, I felt in control again. The next morning, the weight of the previous night's confrontation still hung in the air. I woke up early, expecting Dylan to bring it up. But when he came down to the kitchen, his face was an unreadable mask. "Coffee?" I asked, trying to sound casual as I poured myself a cup. Dylan nodded, settling into a chair at the kitchen table. "We need to talk, Lucy." I set the mug in front of him, taking a deep breath as I sat across from him. The tension was thick, and I could feel the coming storm in the way he avoided looking directly at me. "You didn't have to do that last night," he began, his voice low. "You made a scene." "A scene?" I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Dylan, Corey has been undermining me for months. You know it. She's constantly belittling me in front of your friends, and you just stand by and let it happen." He finally met my eyes, but there was a flicker of frustration behind them. "It's not that simple. Corey's important for business. She's got connections that we both need." "Business?" I repeated, incredulous. "Is that really all this is about? You let her disrespect me because of some business deals?" Dylan ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. "You don't understand. She's been in my life for years, long before you and I even met. Cutting her off isn't just about business. It's about keeping things smooth. For us." I leaned forward, my heart pounding in my chest. "Keeping things smooth?" "Dylan, she's actively trying to humiliate me. Last night, she deliberately excluded me, and you didn't say a word. I had to stand up for myself because you wouldn't." He shook his head. "I didn't want to make things worse. You turning up and announcing you owned the restaurant. Lucy, that was over the top." I could feel the anger bubbling up again, but I forced myself to stay calm. "No, Dylan. What's over the top is you continuing to defend her while she disrespects me. I don't care how long she's been in your life. I'm your wife. You should have my back." Dylan stood up abruptly, pushing his chair back with a sharp scrape. "This isn't about choosing sides, Lucy. It's about keeping the peace. I'm trying to make sure everything doesn't blow up." "Well, guess what?" I said, standing up to face him. "It's already blown up. And if you can't see how toxic this situation is, and I don't know what to say." He stared at me for a long moment, his expression softening slightly, as if realizing just how hurt I was. "I didn't mean for it to get this bad. I don't know how to handle this." "Handle it by standing by me," I said quietly. "That's all I'm asking." There was a long silence between us, and for a moment I thought maybe he would finally understand. But instead, he picked up his keys from the counter. "I need to clear my head," he muttered, and without another word, he walked out the door. As the door clicked shut behind him, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness wash over me. It was clear now. The fallout from last night had left cracks in more than just my relationship with Corey. It had exposed deep fractures in my marriage with Dylan, fractures that I wasn't sure we could ever repair. The decision to leave Dylan wasn't easy, but after everything I'd endured, it became impossible to ignore. His reluctance to defend me, to stand by my side when Corey humiliated me, showed me the truth. He was more concerned with his image and connections than with me. When John came into my life, the difference between them was stark. John was strong, protective, and genuinely cared about me, not out of obligation or appearances, but because he truly saw me. I met John on a cold evening after another argument with Dylan. We had fought about Corey again, and he just couldn't see why it bothered me so much. I needed air and took a walk, hoping to clear my head. That's when a couple of men on the street began harassing me, throwing insults and getting too close. Panic gripped me until John appeared, stepping in like a silent force. With a calm but commanding presence, he told the men to back off. They scattered without a word, sensing John was someone they shouldn't mess with. "Are you all right?" he asked me after they were gone, his voice low but full of concern. I nodded, still shaken but incredibly grateful. "Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come." From that night, John became a regular part of my life. He didn't judge me or push me to talk, but I found myself opening up to him naturally. His presence felt like a balm to the storm my life had become. When I eventually told him about Corey and Dylan, he listened patiently, his dark eyes narrowing at the mention of Dylan's spinelessness. "He should be protecting you," John had said, his voice firm, but without judgment. "No one should let someone else tear down the person they love." That's when I knew. I had been clinging to a man who refused to see my worth, while John had, without hesitation, stood up for me, because he valued me. I realized then that love wasn't about social gatherings or keeping up appearances. Love was about protection, loyalty, and feeling safe with someone. I made up my mind to leave Dylan the next morning. When I told him there was no grand confrontation, no tears. He barely put up a fight. Perhaps deep down, Dylan had always known he couldn't give me what I needed. His world was all about status, business deals, and maintaining relationships like the one with Corey. My departure was a footnote in his life, just another shift in his social landscape. I packed my things and walked out of the house we had shared, feeling lighter than I had in months. John was waiting for me outside. He hadn't pushed me to leave, but when I finally did, he was there, steady and sure, ready to help me rebuild. "Are you sure about this?" he asked as he helped me put my suitcase into his car. I looked up at him, no hesitation in my heart. "Yes. I've never been more sure." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of emotions, freedom, fear, and hope. John and I grew closer, our bond deepening with every passing day. He made me feel secure, like I was finally standing on solid ground after months of uncertainty. As John lifted his glass, he smiled at me, his eyes soft but filled with pride. "To new beginnings," he said. I clinked my glass against his and smiled, knowing that this was the turning point. Not just for us, but for me, for the life I had finally chosen.